The Chicago Bears have been trying a few different players at slightly different positions, and it feels like they're grooming them to step into bigger roles in 2026.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, I want to touch on the Bears players that they've been trying at a few different spots, just trying to see what kind of flexibility they might have and whether or not it could lead to a more permanent change down the line. You're not going to see anybody move to a brand new position between now and week one, but I think the Bears are trying to figure out in the future if they're going to move on from some other players, what their options would be to replace them with guys on the roster versus guys they would have to bring in from outside of the organization. So we'll talk about Kyler Gordon moving from just playing slot cornerback to trying some different spots around the secondary. We'll talk about Gervon Dexter's specific role on the interior and what the future of the defensive tackle position could look like. And same thing at linebacker for Ruben Hyppolite, who might be being developed to take over as a starter in the middle next season, not just as the number 3 linebacker that he may end up playing this year. But I want to start with Kyler Gordon because I think this is the most consequential of the players moving around. This is not a new movement. We heard about this in April initially, that they were going to try cross-training him at some other spots in the secondary, that Dennis Allen wants to find other positions Gordon can play, if anything, just to find more playing time for him. You know, they gave Kyler Gordon this big contract extension. He was a really effective slot cornerback last season, but as a slot cornerback, you know, you're not playing during the plays when you don't have a slot corner on the field. You know, in your base defense, you have 2 corners and 2 safeties, and on those plays, Kyler Gordon isn't on the field, and that's okay. It's not like he's missing a ton of time, but if the idea is put your most talented players on the field as much as possible, maybe it would make sense to put Kyler Gordon at a different position in base defense to get him on the field, and then when they go in nickel, move him back into the slot and then bring another player back on in whatever spot he's moving out of there. Now, I don't know that we're going to see that become like a full-time thing this season, but I do think there's something to be said about seeing what Kyler Gordon can do at these other positions to then help you decide next off-season what roster moves you want to make in your secondary. That if you feel like Kyler Gordon could fill in at a different spot, maybe you move him and put someone else at slot cornerback as opposed to having to replace another position, someone else on the roster. So just to put some context around this, I want to go back and play for you. This is what Dennis Allen said. This clip is from April, so I realize it's not brand new or fresh, but it's just a good reminder of like how they're approaching moving Kyler Gordon around and some of the motivation behind it for the Bears defensive coordinator.
Does he go outside and compete at outside corner? Does he compete some at safety? I've told him to, that he needs to be learning both of those spots, and we'll figure out where that second position, that where he can go and compete, and hopefully we can find some more playing time for him.
Do you have a sense of whether he'd be a better outside corner or safety?
Yeah, he's played more outside corner, so obviously that would be the comfort level. But some of the things that I see him do and the way that he fits in the run game tells me that he could be a fit, at safety also. So, and look, we've had guys that have had the flexibility to play a lot of different positions. I think that's important in today's football, where you're not just locked into one thing, being able to be multiple and do a lot of different things. And so that's something that I think he can do. And as we get to know him better, spend more time with him, start to get out on the field with him a little bit more, we'll have a better feel for, where that second position might be and where we want to try to work him.
To me, the most interesting pathway here is safety. Outside corner, okay, it's not that different, and he played some outside corner early in his career, played it in college, and you can see where if they're still on the fence about Tyreek Stevenson, it might be nice to test out Kyler Gordon back at outside cornerback. To just, if over the course of the season you decide that the guys you have on the outside aren't playing that well, you could have Kyler play on the outside and then move back in the slot, or have Josh Blackwell play in the slot and leave Kyler on the outside. That feels a little bit more like standard cornerback flexibility. But safety has the most intrigue for me because it's more of a different position, covering deep on the back end there, but also the contract implications there, right? We know that Jaquan Brisker and Kevin Byard, both starting safeties, are in the last years of their contract. If Jaquan Brisker can stay healthy, he might get a contract extension. Kevin Byard's a little trickier just because he's older, so it's hard to envision a scenario where he gets like a big extension, but maybe you bring him back for another year or something. But the Bears are bracing for the possibility that one or both of their current starting safeties could leave next year in free agency. And so it makes a lot of sense to say, hey, we think Kyler Gordon has some skill sets that would fit well at the safety position potentially. And so you're not just going to upright move him to safety right now, completely, cold turkey, brand new position in the middle of the offseason because A, there's not playing time for it, but B, you don't need to right now, right? But if you have him work at that at practice sometimes and just kind of see how he does at safety, not even necessarily in a regular season game, but maybe in a preseason game and certainly at training camp practices, and get a sense of is that an option for 2026? That, okay, could you let Kevin Byard go and then move Kyler Gordon to safety and have Gordon and Brisker be your two safeties in the back end? I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility here. I mean, most likely, if we're being honest, Kyler Gordon stays at slot cornerback, maybe occasionally plays on the outside, but most likely everyone's going to stay put from a permanent standpoint. But it's nice to know that, hey, if you have an injury, certainly with Jaquan Brisker's injury history, that Kyler Gordon could be an option to fill in at safety, especially in Dennis Allen's defense. He likes to run a dime package with 6 defensive backs in the field where they'll bring in a third safety in addition to a third corner and have that third safety be kind of a rover who can go all over the field. And that third safety role is perhaps most similar to like a slot cornerback role, somewhere between a slot cornerback and a strong safety in the box. So to be able to have Kyler Gordon have some of that positional flexibility allows Dennis Allen to move him around and make him that star position player in his defense in some certain personnel packages. So I'm excited to see what that's going to look like for Kyler Gordon and whether this is a precursor to him making a more permanent position switch or whether it's just sort of having it as a backup plan. Because again, I don't think they're doing this with the plan of moving Gordon. I think it's the idea of let's see what our options are so that if you get into free agency next year, you can either sign a safety as one's available or know that in your back pocket you could move Kyler Gordon if you didn't have a better option. To be able to know you've got multiple options there versus not knowing whether Kyler Gordon can do it at all, and then it would be a complete unknown. It's smarter to just kind of get a sense of what he can and can't handle at this point, and maybe he can't do it, and that's fine, and he'll stay and be a great slot corner, or maybe he can be an even more versatile weapon for this Bears defense on the back end. We're also seeing some positional flexibility on the front end, up in the trenches with how the Bears are using the defensive tackles, and I want to look at what the future of this defensive tackle group looks like with Gervon, Dexter sort of torn this line between, is he going to be a top flight interior pass rusher or is he going to be a nose tackle? And there's nothing wrong with being a nose tackle, but we'll hear from Andrew Billings about what that looks like on this Bears defensive line next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I have the Gametime app on my phone, and I use it all the time. I went to a baseball game for Father's Day, got my tickets on Gametime. I have tickets to go see the comedian Daniel Tosh coming up in a couple weeks, got my tickets on Gametime as well. Or, certainly if you want to get in on big time sporting events like the NBA playoffs, now in the finals, I guess the Stanley Cup finals, a little far away from Chicago, but wherever you are in the country, you can find killer last minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees in Gametime. It's a total game changer for the ticket buying experience. It's the best way to take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So Kyler Gordon's move and flexibility, I think, is a little bit more dramatic than some of the other places the Bears have been moving guys around. But throughout OTAs and then mandatory minicamp, we saw Gervon Dexter playing more nose tackle than he had done in Matt Eberflus's defense. And he kind of started as a nose tackle initially, and then they made Pickens the nose tackle, and they were kind of going back and forth with them. And of course, in Eberflus's defense, they had them shift around quite a bit. So there's always been somewhat of a blurred line between nose tackle and the three technique defensive tackle spot in Chicago during Gervon Dexter's career. But I also think as they try and figure out, athletically and body types and responsibilities of what they want these defensive tackles to do, at some point there becomes a little bit of a specialization, right? Like, it's never a complete specialization in the same sense that, like, Andrew Billings as a nose tackle last year before he got hurt was showing quite a bit of prowess as a pass rusher, right? It's not just that the nose tackle is the big run stuffer and the three technique is the small pass rusher, but the nose tackle is not a pass rusher, but a really good run defender, and the three technique's not a run defender, but a really good pass rusher. Like, you have to be able to do a little bit of everything, but clearly, like, for how they are aligned, right? When you put the nose tackle is in a 4-3 like this is in the one technique position, essentially like shaded between the center and a guard, right? They're that position, because of the rules of how how blocking schemes work on offense. Generally, the nose tackle is going to get more double teams than the three technique, and the three technique gets double teamed a lot too, and it depends on the direction of the run and a lot of different things. But like, the nose tackle is more of a space eater type of position and role, whereas the three technique is more of a penetrator, disruptor position. And so there are certain aspects of defensive tackle play that if you're primarily focusing at nose tackle or three technique, that you're going to want to focus on different things to try and make the highest impact from that respective position on the field. And so when they keep Gervon Dexter at 315 pounds, that's despite being, we should say, like an athletic, quick defensive tackle. Like, he is a lean 315 pounds, but still, like, that is a heavier defensive tackle. That's more in the nose tackle type of mold, and that's part of why they drafted Gervon Dexter, was because of how well he could move for his size. But like, the exact opposite end of the spectrum in terms of the smallest of the small defensive tackles, somebody like Aaron Donald, who, of course, not comparing the two, but just saying, like, Aaron Donald weighed 280. So we're talking about a 35-pound difference. And some nose tackles are 320, 330. I mean, the difference in size between what you might slim down to be as fast of a three technique as possible versus keeping the bulk to play a little bit more nose tackle. But I think nose tackle requires some extra smarts and instincts, whereas like three technique is a little bit more like, not pin your ears back and go, but in that style of play, whereas nose tackle is a little bit more reading and reacting and trying to fill the right spots and kind of do more dirty work type of stuff. And the Bears nose tackle, Andrew Billings, is seeing Gervon Dexter make those advancements to help make him a more effective nose tackle than he would be earlier in his career. And that makes some interesting implications for the future of the defensive tackle position on this Bears defensive line. So first we'll hear from Billings, and then we'll take a look at what this might look like in the long term.
We've seen Gervon playing a little bit of nose. How do you evaluate him as a nose tackle in there?
Well, he got here was playing nose that first couple of weeks, so I like him at nose. I thought he was going to be the nose, so I like him.
Is there anything you're doing to help bring him along there?
I mean, right now he's in that mindset of he's learning how to not only just beat somebody athletically, but beat him mentally. So he kind of got to figure that on his own, but he's doing good at that.
Have you noticed the change in Gervon at all? It seems like he's trying to step up a little bit more as a leader in that room.
Yeah, definitely. I think since like I said, I think it clicked for him. The game has definitely slowed down for him, so he's helping coach up Shamar and stuff like that.
So you can see where when the Bears use a second round pick on a defensive tackle like Shamar Turner, who's more in that 290-pound range, that can be a player who's maybe more naturally slotting into that three technique pass rusher spot. And with Dexter up at 315 or whatever his weight is now, we don't know the exact number, but like around there, that could be a more natural nose tackle spot. And you could think of that as perhaps the long-term path of this Bears defensive line, because Andrew Billings is in the last year of his contract with Chicago. They could obviously bring him back or extend him if they want to, but for now, he's set to be a free agent next season. And Grady Jarrett is certainly on the wrong side of 30 at 32, and his contract, he just signed a 3-year deal, but is really guaranteed the first 2 years, and then after 2026, the Bears could get out of that contract when he's 34 years old. So you could see like a long-term future defensive line of like Dexter at the nose tackle and Turner at the three technique, like those two as your starters. But we've kind of thought of Dexter as being the three technique pass rusher, developing next to like Pickens has been kind of playing more of the nose tackle type of role, even though he was a little bit more of a three technique style in college. And he's been obviously such a big disappointment for the Bears since being drafted that we're kind of almost intentionally excluding him from these long-term plans because we just assume he's probably not going to be them. But you can see the future here, right? Where as the Bears eventually in a couple years move on from 32, then 34-year-old Grady Jarrett, Shamar Turner will have been developing for that year or two to take over into that three technique spot. And as the Bears potentially move on from 30-year-old Andrew Billings, he'll then be 31 next offseason if he enters free agency, that maybe Gervon Dexter is then ready to play that nose tackle spot in more of a fuller time capacity there, knowing that, you'll rotate kind of between the two and shift around the defensive line sometimes, but perhaps Dexter's long-term future is more of a nose tackle than a three technique pass rusher spot, despite the fact, though, that he had, 5.5 sacks this past season? Or 5 sacks exactly. Like you almost wonder, like, are you missing out on some of his potential as a pass rusher if you make him a nose tackle? Like nose tackles get some sacks, but like you're not going to be a 10 sack guy at the nose tackle spot. You're just double teamed too much, and your role on stunts and on blitzes is oftentimes to get in the way of blockers so that other pass rushers can get the sacks and get home. And you wonder, like, are you getting everything you can out of Dexter if you make him a nose tackle more than a designated pass rushing tackle? I think that's oversimplifying it a little bit there. But I do wonder, like, if you start to picture, like, if you think like long term here, as Dexter goes through his rookie contract and eventually approaches free agency, like the big nose tackles do tend to cost a little less than the top flight pass rushing interior guys. So could there be some potential long-term savings realized if you do make Gervon Dexter more of a nose tackle? I don't think the Bears are thinking about it like that. I don't think that's the plan. I don't think they go in developing a player saying, how can we save money on his next contract? Like the goal is make the best possible defense and put each individual player in the best position for them to succeed. But I think there can be multiple benefits here. And I think as Ryan Poles builds this roster, they're not so like dead set on one specific outcome. I don't think they go in saying, all right, for sure, Dexter's going to be the new nose, Turner's going to be the three technique. That's our long-term future. I think they're saying Dexter can kind of play both. And if Turner pans out the way we want to, then we can leave Dexter at nose. And if for some reason Turner doesn't pan out, then maybe Dexter can play the three technique and then you can find something else at the nose, right? Like I think much like Kyler Gordon in the secondary, with Dexter playing nose or three technique, they want to leave their options open and see how well he can play both spots. And I think he's got the kind of physical tools, and the growth we've seen so far suggests that he should be fine no matter where they put him on the defensive line. It's about having options as you kind of develop everybody else up front. I also think they're keeping their options open at the linebacker position. I think as they dabble with Ruben Hyppolite as a potential starter in base defense, they may also be testing out to see, like, could he take over in an even more significant role in year 2 if they make a big change at linebacker. So we'll take a look at the future of the linebacker position and where Hyppolite may or may not fit into bigger plans there next on Locked On Bears. You never want to get carried away and think, okay, well, every rookie you draft is always going to develop into exactly what you think they're going to be. That's kind of why I wanted to have some pause there on Shamar Turner as well. Like, there's no guarantee that Turner becomes a great pass rusher. There's no guarantee that any young player you develops exactly into all the things you want and hope they will be. But that's also why you draft those players. And that's also the preamble here for linebacker Ruben Hyppolite as a 4th-round pick who was projected by many to be an undrafted rookie free agent. I want to be very careful not to get so far ahead on what we think he could be as he develops over his career, because we've seen recent other Bears linebacker draft picks not really ever amount to anything more than a backup or a special teams player. I think back to obviously Noah Sewell in the 5th round a couple years ago, but then before that, a 4th-round pick back in 2018, Joel Iyiegbuniwe was drafted 115th overall compared to Ruben Hyppolite, who was 132nd overall. Iyiegbuniwe was drafted even earlier than Hyppolite, and he, of course, never really amounted to anything with the Bears. Bounced around a little bit with the Panthers briefly, but then is out of the NFL after about 4 or 5 seasons. So I use that as the on the front end to say, like, we can't expect Ruben Hyppolite to develop into some starting caliber NFL linebacker right away or even at all as a 4th-round pick. But that being said, when Dennis Allen talks about the importance of speed in his defense, I can't help but wonder if Hyppolite gets the early nod as the number 3 linebacker starting in base defense, filling that Jack Sanborn role, to have a faster player in that spot than what they had last season, than what Dennis Allen was coming into this year with. And I can't help but wonder if they go through this season looking at the linebacker core and evaluating with a close eye how well Tremaine Edmunds transitions into this defense, because I think they were disappointed with Edmunds' performance last season. I think Edmunds was a little disappointed with his own performance last season, and he's costing them $17.5 million against the salary cap this year and $17.5 million against the salary cap next year. And so if he doesn't play particularly well, and the bar should be pretty high here because Tremaine Edmunds is the 3rd highest paid linebacker in the NFL on a per year basis, behind only Fred Warner and Roquan Smith. And so presumably you would like Tremaine Edmunds to play close to the 3rd best linebacker in the NFL. And he certainly wasn't that last season. And maybe it's not fair to expect him to be exactly that this season, but he's got to be a lot better. And if he's not, are you going to continue to pay $17.5 million for a linebacker who's not necessarily playing like a $17.5 million linebacker? And so if, say, we get through this season and they reach the conclusion that, Edmunds is a good player, just not a 3rd highest paid caliber player, then maybe they decide to move on and take on I think they save like $14 million in salary cap space by releasing him. And then if Dennis Allen wants to replace his speed with speed, you have this speedy linebacker you just drafted in the 4th round the year before. And that speedy linebacker you just drafted will have a year of experience, not only just in your defense, but potentially as a starter at the Sam linebacker position, that 3rd linebacker spot, which is a much, much smaller role. I mean, we're not talking about a ton of snaps there. It's going to be maybe 200-300 snaps out of the 1,000 plus that the defense is on the field for. But you can simultaneously be evaluating, do we bring Tremaine Edmunds back? We'll also be evaluating how much more could Ruben Hyppolite do? If he handles the Sam position well and has the speed and the instincts and can keep up there, could he be an option? Like, if he plays well enough, he might not be, you can't expect him right away to just be as good perhaps as Tremaine Edmunds, but could he give them enough confidence to say, hey, we're going to move on from Edmunds and we have an in-house option available if we want to? Again, Hyppolite wouldn't necessarily be plan A as the Tremaine Edmunds replacement, but it gives you that option and that flexibility to know that we've got something in-house if we need to. Like we were talking about with Kyler Gordon earlier. You have Kyler Gordon dabble at safety over the course of this offseason and maybe in the season a little bit, so that then if you move on from Brisker and or Byard, you could move Gordon to safety, but you could also just get a replacement safety. And you kind of have that other player on your roster as a backup plan in case free agency and the draft don't bring you the starter you're looking for. Well, now you have another player on the roster who you feel like could slot over into that open position and take over as a starter there. It's a little bit different expecting a second-year, fourth-round pick to do it than someone like Kyler Gordon, who's a veteran who they just gave a big contract extension to. That's why I tried to preface this by saying let's not get ahead of ourselves with Ruben Hyppolite. But I just wonder if his fast track into the starting lineup isn't also a time where they're evaluating his potential for taking over next to Tremaine Edmonds in the middle of this defense. Because they gave TJ Edwards the big contract extension. He's the one who's a little bit more, certainly a lot more locked in with the Bears. His contract runs through 2027 now. It's guaranteed this year, guaranteed next year. So he's locked in for the next 2 years. He's not going anywhere. But he's also a little bit of a slower linebacker. So when Dennis Allen says, I want speed at linebacker, if you end up moving away from Tremaine Edmonds next year, there goes a bunch of speed at linebacker. Well, lo and behold, you've got all the speed also right there next to him in Ruben Hyppolite. For in all likelihood, if they do move on from Tremaine Edmonds next year, they're signing a new starter. They're drafting a new starter. I don't think they drafted Ruben Hyppolite saying, we think this guy can be a year 2 starter at the middle linebacker position in this defense. I think we've seen Dennis Allen in the past with the Saints generally prefer experienced veterans at that linebacker spot. And I know for a while there was some challenges there in New Orleans, but Demario Davis, I think, was such a mainstay for him there. I think he wants a specific type of smart veteran leader there that if they move on from Edmonds, it probably wouldn't be a second-year former fourth-round pick, but you never know. It all depends on how well someone like Hyppolite adapts and develops and grows quickly within the NFL. We've seen undrafted free agents and late-round draft picks latch on quickly even at a position like linebacker, on other teams elsewhere. I mean, TJ Edwards came in the NFL as an undrafted free agent. Wasn't an elite player year 1 right away coming out of the gate with the Philadelphia Eagles, but by year 2, he was a starter in the middle of that defense. You could see a similar trajectory for somebody like Ruben Hyppolite. It's not likely, but it's not impossible, right? It's not that it never happens or that it's unheard of. It's just something I don't think is plan A for the Bears, but an option in their back pocket as they kind of look for flexibility. So I just think it's important because we spent a lot of time as the Chicago Bears fan base. When they draft Luther Burden, it's like, when are they going to move on from DJ Moore, right? Or when they draft Colston Loveland, that means, Cole Kmet's gone right away. And perhaps at some point those will be the case. But it feels a little bit more to me like Hyppolite could have an even quicker path to take it over pretty quickly. And Shamar Turner is in the weeds or in the wings to take over on the interior there. And I guess Kyler Gordon's not in this category of rookie player, but there's more than just the big names in the first 2 draft picks that are giving the Bears future flexibility, where you're not in a position where you have to get rid of the veteran you have because you just got this thing that you have to get him out of the way. But now you've got other options. So you're not just saying it's Andrew Billings or bust. You're not saying it's Tremaine Edmonds or bust. It's Kevin Byard or bust. It's DJ Moore or Cole Kmet or bust. Now you have alternate options and flexibility to move on from players if you want to move on from them, keep them if you want to keep them, and just go into free agency with that flexibility to say, we could sign a player at this position or we could not. We can let the free agents, sort of the board, the draft board and the free agent board come to you and not feel so hamstrung to have to fill specific positions in specific ways. And that's the kind of team building flexibility we've seen Ryan Poles really prioritize throughout his tenure as general manager, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, but nonetheless, it's a consistent pattern we see from him. Certainly, I know that's all sort of a long ways away, but I think the offseason is a good time to kind of look ahead a little bit and look at how the present will affect the future there. And we're going to keep doing that all throughout the offseason here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Of course, this time of year, we're not quite full 5 days a week. We're coming to you 3 days a week. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday is the schedule I've been trying to stick with so far in June. As we get you closer and closer to training camp, we'll ramp back up to a full 5 days a week. But that's why you got to be subscribed so you're not missing any of our episodes as they come back out. And that way, when you are listening, when you do get a Locked On Bears episode, I hope it just makes it a little bit easier for you to bear down.